Welcome, everyone. Today's webinar is brought to you by NC State's Industry Extension Services. And I'm going to turn it over right now to Bill Iacovelli, who is an extension specialist with IES, for a couple of remarks and introduction of today's speaker and topic. Bill?
Good morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure to introduce Frederick Fjellstedt to you. Frederick's background, he has a lot of experience leading, training, coaching uh, in the field of lean manufacturing, lean thinking, and leadership. A lot of practical knowledge and expertise in helping organizations develop strategy, as you'll see this morning, but also transformation and such. And over 10 years of that comes from experience working directly at Toyota, who are definitely leaders in the development of the Hoshin Kanri mindset. So I think you'll really enjoy learning and listening to Frederick. And as I said, he works worldwide with businesses on trying to develop stronger leaders and stronger culture organizationally. So I'm just going to let Frederick take it from here. Good morning, or well, good afternoon, Frederick, as Frederick's in Sweden.
Yeah, thank you, Bill, and good morning to you and the rest of you, and thank you for inviting me to do a presentation for your network. I'm really excited about this. So I will be starting to share my screen to make sure. And then I just want to confirm that you now see my screen. Is that okay?
Yes. Yes, we can see it.
So, once again, thank you for having me here, and thank you for that kind introduction, Bill. I will be having a webinar today to talk about how we can drive breakthrough results coming from that Hoshin Kanri thinking. And just like Bill said, I have 10 years at Toyota and in total around 20 years working in the area of lean transformation, leadership training, leadership building, and which Hoshin is very much a big part of, since that, I mean, one of the big challenges I have learned over the years is that strategic thinking, and that's quite complex and challenging for many leaders and management teams. I have also been co-author of a book on the topic of Hoshin Kanri. And today I work at a company named Hups, which is a Swedish-based company. And what we are doing is that we are building self-improvement organization and we don't talk so much lean, we talk about flow orientation and flow efficiency. So we do help our customers with a training management system or transformation management system. We do training and expert services. So that's where I'm working since 2 years ago, where we help large manufacturing organizations, logistics companies, service organizations to become more flow oriented by building up the right capabilities in the organization. But today we have around 40 minutes together, or perhaps a bit less if you want also to allow some questions. And there are a few things I would like to cover. There are 5 main areas. I first just want to kind of give an idea of why this with strategy work is not so easy, and what I have seen from my experience. So kind of why does strategy doesn't land. That's something that I often meet. I will give you kind of a brief introduction to what Hoshin Kanri then actually is and how that connects to that challenge. We will talk about setting the direction, which is of course an important part. I will talk about how do we engage people on all levels, and what do we need to think and act as leaders. And then finally, perhaps the most critical part, but quite often also the most neglected part, if I dare to say so, and that's driving execution. So how do we make this happen? And there I want to give you some practical insights on what I have seen being very effective, both as visualization but also leadership mindset. And then, like we said, at the end there will be time for a Q&A. So those are the 5-6 topics I would like to cover here today. So first of all, Hoshin and strategy execution, strategy deployment is something that lies very close to my heart, because I've been working with that at Toyota. I was responsible for in the team that was about to implement that in our European organization. But I also have been working with a lot of leaders over the years that are struggling with this. So one thing that I have seen is a very common pattern, and this will be kind of something that will be as a red thread, I think, also in this presentation, and that is, why are people so busy and then so little gets done? That's my own experience. I don't know if you agree with that, but we often see that people are working quite hard, but we don't really see the movement that we want to do. And one thing is that we often have a lot of initiatives in flight, meaning that we tend to crowd the system with too many things, that there are too many things that we feel are important and we need to do. So what that will lead us to is to have many parallel priorities, all important, but none kind of clearly ahead, and that creates the feeling of making progress. So because we do a lot of things, but do we really make progress, or are we just running around having a high activity level? So one pattern, or one part of the pattern, is that we tend to have too many initiatives going on at the same time. And many times, as a consequence of this, we see that decisions are being delayed. And when decisions are being delayed, everything tends to slow down, because many times we need to have decisions on different levels to be able to move ahead. So people are juggling, leaders escalate, meetings tend to multiply, and then everything slows down. And then many times that's a consequence of that we have too much already going on from the beginning. So when the decisions are being delayed, the flow of the things that we want to do is slowing down. And we also see a lot of context switching everywhere, especially when we have a lot of initiatives going on. And context switching is a really obstacle for making good progress. Because many times, without prioritization, where everything could feel as important, we tend to frequently change our attention before completing one task, or there's a completing one task, it should say. So we jump from one task to another, or from one initiative to another, and the consequence is that once again we feel that we are working really hard, but at the end we don't really finish that much. So the last part is actually that we have movement, but we are not finishing. So that kind of becomes a false picture many times, that we are working like crazy, but how much do we actually move all the way to the finishing line? So we can see a lot of activity, but we don't see as much outcomes as we would like. So these are kind of general patterns that at least I have identified over and over again. And this creates a challenge when we talk about becoming more efficient in our strategy work, of course, because everything here slows things down, takes a lot of brain power from leaders, and perhaps make it difficult to see clearly where do we need to go. So that's one part of it. Another part coming into more the Hoshin Kanri, and here I would like to take a real case. This was a manufacturing company in Sweden I had the opportunity to work with a couple of years ago, And this is a big global, one of the biggest manufacturing companies in Sweden. So they are present all over the world. And I worked with the team who were responsible of improving the way of making strategy stick and strategy actually being delivered as they wanted. So of course they do a lot of good things, but there were one thing that stuck to me, and that was something that was could be displayed like this. So we had the management team. This was the executive management team of this company. They had, like they do, discussion on where should our strategic priorities be, what is important, what it will the future have, and so on. And they recognized fairly early that we need AI in our company because there is a huge potential in the field of AI. And if we don't start to work with AI, we are running a risk of falling behind. So that should be a strategic priority. So this is, of course, a bit simplification, but that was what was decided a couple of years ago. And I think many companies were on the similar track and probably are still on a similar track. The thing was here that the management team and the levels below the management team didn't really see exactly what the direction with AI was. And one reason is, of course, that it's a new area. It's difficult to foresee what would be the solutions and so on. It's moving so quick, which is, of course, one part of it. But when they wanted to engage the organization, they were trying to engage them in a way that was not that effective. And basically, and this was how they explained it themselves. So this is their own words. It was that instead of working with breaking down and clarifying what is the path forward, what are the expectations and so on, they said that what we did basically was to just shout down into the engine room, and the engine room being shop floor or first line leaders or second line leaders, and they kind of from the boardroom shouted, "We need AI," and hope that someone in the engine room understood what that would mean. But the consequence was, of course, that the people in the organization, the people in the engine room, they were quite confused. Kind of how do I relate to that? What does that mean for me in our work, etc. And of course, that led to perhaps many of the people in the organization felt it's nothing for me. I don't need to invest or learn more about that. Some people might said, okay, started to run in a completely different direction, perhaps than the board or the management team wanted. So they kind of just shouted this out. And what was then the consequence? And we did a Gemba walk a couple of months later where we had people from the management team, we had a factory manager, we had a production manager, and we actually went and visit a first line manager to see what she had done with AI. And they have done a few good things. So it was not about what they did actually on the floor, but it was more how does that link, whatever was doing on the shop floor, how does that link to the intention that the management team had? And this is something also we see over and over again, that we tend to just shout something that is clear or less unclear to us as managers and hope that someone in the organization will pick that up. So when we did that Gemba walk, there were a few things that we could learn from it. So there was a very busy organization in this, but the outcome were quite weak. And what they lacked was clarity. So clarity here doesn't mean that someone should provide them the solutions using AI, but there was a lack of clarity of what is the intention, what direction should we go at. There was not really a breakdown. As I said, the factory manager and the production manager and the person from the management team, they had not thought about what does this mean on my level, and then broke it down to the next level. They were just pushing this all the way out to the front line, hoping that the frontline people would do something good with that. But we could also see that people were trying their best. So everyone wanted to contribute, but it was sometimes difficult. So it became a very scattered picture, and that left that there were kind of no control of the outcome. And once again, the control of outcome is not that there were specific solutions needed, but the leadership team, when they just shouted, we need AI, they didn't have an idea of what the outcome could look like or what they were striving towards. So with that lack of clarity, we see that AI could mean very different things for different teams. And to some extent, that will always be the case. But we get force arrows or forces that can go in many different directions in an organization. And rarely we have that luxury that people can run towards where they want to go. And the breakdown was not there. So there were no concrete annual targets. There were nothing more concrete for the organization to continue to build on. It was more of that we need AI. And the people were trying their best. There were high effort, some good things. And so it's nothing to blame for the people who did what they thought were good, but it was disconnected many times from the intent. And we want to connect that much more. And the lack of control was that the direction should be set from the top, but the execution is left bottom up. Here, there were no directions, so the execution just became bottom up, and it was kind of, we were hoping for the best. So this is also together with that kind of, we are loading the system with a lot. This is some of the challenges we have, and why strategy many times make it difficult to land. And I like this quote. I often do this, start with this also when I talk about Hoshin Kanri, and it says, it took the management team 30 days to develop the strategy, and it took the organization 30 seconds to misunderstand it. It's kind of, we are just shouting into the engine room, we need AI. And then in 30 seconds, that might be misunderstood to, I don't know what to do, or this is probably what they are thinking about. And Hoshin Kanri, to great extent, exists to close that exactly gap. Because how can we avoid that whatever management team is doing are not disconnected from the rest of the organization? So that's where Hoshin coming in, and it becomes more than just a method or tool. It's also very much a philosophy, like many other things that are in the lean thinking. So that kind of gives an idea, at least from my point of view, why I think there is a big challenge working with strategy in general, and where I believe Hoshin Kanri can actually help us to overcome many of those challenges. It will not be a silver bullet, but it will be a good framework of building better capabilities that we normally have in an organization. So Hoshin Kanri, I don't like to use Japanese words. I have not, sometimes we call Hoshin Kanri policy deployment, but since I'm from Toyota background, I have kept Hoshin Kanri as, because it's kind of in my blood, in a sense, DNA. So, but Hoshin Kanri are Japanese, and the Hoshin part means more setting the direction. So when we talk about Hoshin, we talk about setting the direction of the strategic or the organization. So here we talk about defining and prioritizing mid to long-term goals. So we look a bit further ahead. We break those mid to long-term goals into annual targets, so it becomes more concrete and actionable. And key is that we involve all levels in the organization to clarify these objectives and strategies. So we don't just shout into the engine room. We need to have system in place where they are involved in a good way. while Kanri is more managing the process. So once we have done the plan, how do we make sure that we actually fulfill the plan? And as I said in the beginning, my experience is that this is many times where we are struggling perhaps the most. And here is where we use the PDCA thinking. So we are creating problem solving strategies, we implement these constantly, we are following up, and we take appropriate steps when we feel that there is a deviation. So everyone who are familiar to lean also recognize this pattern. So when I talk about strategy execution, and I will come back to that later on, it's not so much about following the plan we have agreed. It's much more about doing what we need to do to reach the targets. And that's for me is a big difference in our mindset. And Hoshin is often called those breakthroughs, those step changes. And we tend to visualize it in a way where we have daily management, which is more continuous improvement, making sure we are delivering on the plans that we have set for our production or whatever that can look like. And what we do with Hoshin is taking a more system approach to how can we increase or how can we develop better flow in the whole system by removing bigger problems. How can we establish a new level of standards in a sense, and from there we can continue with daily management. So what with this picture I just want to show, of course, that daily management, continuous improvement goes hand in hand, side by side with Hoshin Kanri, and you need both, and they are complementing each other. So with the daily management we are making small improvements, and with the Hoshin we are taking those bigger leaps, those step changes. And there are three core benefits, I would say, working with that Hoshin Kanri thinking compared perhaps to more traditional strategic work. The first one is it heavily focused on alignment. So how can we get everyone in the organization seeing the same things and striving towards the same goals, and how do connect them, of course, to the corporate vision. So the alignment is one big thing. The second is participation. And of course, alignment comes with people participating, but it's also participation in the sense of we are contributing on different levels. So here we talk about total participation. So from top to bottom, we participate and we cooperate, because at the end we only have kind of one game that we play, and that's for our company to perform as good as possible. We don't need to compete inside the organization. And then the third one is that with Hoshin we have those built-in improvement cycles. So it's much more about learning, understanding what deviations, how do we act on them, rather than more traditional, here we have a plan, make sure we follow the plan, and that's the important thing. So the improvement cycle, of course, builds a different type of leadership, a different type of mindset. So these are kind of the three main benefits I see working with Hoshin Kanri in overcoming those challenges. So if we look at what Hoshin really is, and there are many different ways to describe that. You have probably seen others describing it in a slightly different way. This is how I want, for what I think makes sense to look at it. This is not the right answer, but kind of what I learned from Toyota. What are the main building blocks when we talk about Hoshin? So the first one is, of course, to start with your vision. So what is our vision? What is our long-term goal? And that's many times what we refer to as a true north. So kind of that northern star we can always look at and make sure we are heading in that direction. And if a company is doing something strategically, it's most likely to have some kind of vision. So this many times exists, I would say. But the vision needs to be in a way that we can actually develop breakthrough objectives. So a breakthrough objective is much more of where do we need to be midterm. So if we want to be somewhere far into the future, what are the concrete objectives than where we need to be midterm, much closer to us. And now we start to get more business objectives, much more concrete things. So with those breakthrough objectives, we want to develop annual targets. So with annual targets is where do we need to be this year in order to be able to reach the breakthrough objective on time. So now we start to break this down to something even more concrete. And then, of course, to set annual targets, we need to understand what is the current situation. We need to think about how do we get there. And this is another big thing I see with Hoshin is that it's much more problem solving than planning. So it's much more to understand if this is our target for this year, or if this is our breakthrough objective, what is hindering us? What is stopping us from reaching that? And whatever stops us is the thing that we need to work on. So it's much a more problem solving approach rather than a traditional planning approach, I would say. And then, of course, are we getting there? Do we have an execution? So here we have the KPIs, the progress report, and so on. So for me, these are the 6 main building blocks for building a Hoshin Kanri system. And I always see kind of an invisible line somewhere here. It's not exactly, but you can imagine that there is some line here that the true north and the breakthrough objective is much more management responsibility, setting the direction. This is where the top down should be quite clear. But then the problem solving is a bottom up process. So basically what we are saying is that if this is the direction we set that as a management team, the organization needs to think about what problems do we need to fix in order to reach that. So that's also a good way to combine that top-down approach with the bottom-up. So the first thing we do when we work with Hoshin is, of course, to set the direction. So just spend a few minutes on this part. And let's start and talk about the true north. It's a guiding beacon. Like I said, something we can take aim for. And like we said, business is a journey without an end, so direction matters. We need to make sure we are at least moving in that direction we want to. So that's more of an ideal state. You may never reach it, but the thinking should be that all decisions we take should take us closer to it. So think that more as something, like a guiding thing and not so much black or white. And a good true north, when we have stated that in a good way, it should help us to see and keep the customer in mind. So we do that for the customer. But perhaps even more important, it should provide understanding on what we must do, both strategically and operationally. So a true north should be able to be translated in, so what are the must-do things? So we can understand and take action on that. And like I said, it's probably something we will never reach, but it's a strive. And it helps us to kind of answer which way should we follow. If we have a lot of options, where should we go? That's guiding beacon. So these are kind of what I also have seen kind of where many companies have developed quite a lot in giving mission or vision statement and business and so on. So many times this might be quite developed. But the interesting thing starts. So how do we go from the north, from the true north into breakthrough objectives? So how do we take this closer, and what is really a breakthrough objective? And this is where leaders start to really make an impact, because now we move away from nice writing on the wall or nice writing in a PowerPoint. This becomes much more hands-on and the things that we actually want to achieve. So first of all, with the breakthrough, we often have that midterm horizon. It should be long enough to matter, but short enough to mobilize. And whatever midterm is, it could be very different. Traditionally, it might be 2 to 5 years, but in these times where things are moving really quick, Midterm for some companies might be 1 year or 9 months, I don't know. So it's more that midterm thinking and not focusing so much if it's 2 or 3 or 5 years. And it should directly contribute to the business objective. So a breakthrough is something that contributes to the business. It should not be, I sometimes see breakthrough objectives that is, we want to engage all the people, and that might be important, but that's just a mean to meet something else. So keep the business objective in mind. It's not a side project. And it should be a significant improvement. It should be that step change. And I will come back to that because that is something that will help us move forward as a company. And it should require the organization to stretch. If we can reach that with business as usual, it's not a breakthrough objective. It might be something important to do, but it's not a breakthrough. And we need to break the status quo. So we need to change the way we think and not just working harder. And I would say that these are really, really important if we want to establish and deploy Hoshin Kanri in a good way. Because for me, this is much more leadership mindset. It's not so much about planning or Excel sheets and so on. This is much more about how much do we dare to challenge ourselves. And there could be typical breakthroughs within financial, within market growth, within operational. So in one way, a breakthrough is very it's not rocket science. So describing a breakthrough can be fairly simple. It's much more about how do we define it? Is that something that will help or need us to stretch? Because so many times we already know how to reach a breakthrough. We or organization tend to set a breakthrough saying we need to improve sales with X number of percent, and we know exactly what to do. And if we already know how to do it, it's probably not the breakthrough thinking we want. Because we aim to break status quo by challenging our way of thinking, the paradigm we have in the organization. Like I said, not by working harder, but working in a different way. So here we need to challenge ourselves. So it could be that we need to increase production by 30% without adding cost. And many times, both the 30% might be a stretch, but also that without. If we want to do something without something else happen, that's sometimes much more difficult, or without two other things happening. That will challenge our way of thinking. That would be perhaps something that leaders say, oh, I don't know how to achieve that. Then we are probably on the right track of actually finding real breakthroughs. And that will change the mindset in the organization step by step. It will move us away from making nice plans to actually see how do we change the system we are having? How do we change our current way of thinking? So this is really, really important when we talk about Hoshin and breakthrough thinking. That driver of do we already know how to do it or not? And when we then set a plan for the prioritized problems that we have, because we need to prioritize, there are basically three things that we want to add. We need to understand the need, we need to understand what to achieve, and we need to understand how to get there. And all these three are important. So before we jump into how to get there, we need to understand why is this important for us to fix now? What is the problem? Not only the things we want to do, but what are the things that is stopping us from reaching the target? And what could be the countermeasures? Understanding the root cause or the cause of the problem. When we understand that, we can start to think, so what should we measure? How much should the target level be? And when is the deadline? And then we start to think about who are responsible, what would be the plans and milestones, what are the dependencies, cross-functional, and so on. So developing a Hoshin plan needs to have all these three layers. And what I see most companies and leaders are struggling is to understand the need, and from the need understand what to achieve. So if we want to become better and really driving breakthrough results, I would focus a lot on the need and what to achieve. So that's kind of setting the direction. That's the Hoshin part of this. The fourth part is, of course, we need to engage all levels. Because, like I said, if we just shout out from the boardroom or the management team, we need AI, we are not engaging people. We are just informing people, hoping for the best. So then we look at this part. So how do we meet that top-down and bottom-up approach? And this is where we use the catchball process. This might be something that you have heard before. This is a very typical thing when we talk about Hoshin. And catchball is really that iteration, throwing it back and forth. So bouncing ideas, agreeing, etc., etc. And you can say that the catchball always start on the management level or level one, where they set the Hoshin plan for the whole organization. They are the starting point. And that will lead to direction, activities, and targets to the next level. So from the company Hoshin, each department decide what should be our contribution then, and in between level one and level two, there will be a catchball. First, to clarify what are the expectations for the department, and then perhaps a catchball back saying, this is our thinking, what do you believe, and so on. So you're throwing this baseball or iteration back and forth, and that continues to the team level, where it might become more perhaps of an implementation plan, more concrete, and finally it could end up on individual, where it will be, these are my priorities to contribute. So this is kind of a or a simple picture of what we mean with catchball. And the idea is, of course, that whatever we want to do on level one, individuals and team will contribute with in their actions. So this is how we can connect all levels in the organization. But the trick is, of course, to do that iteration, not just pushing it down in the organization. So when we do catchball, what we are looking for is an open fact-based dialogue between and within levels. And the leadership defines what must be achieved, and the teams define how. So that's where we meet the bottom up or the top down and the bottom up. And at the end, we need to have a handshake on that. So in order to build this, I see that leaders, starting from the management team, need to apply what I call the 4 Cs in their kind of thinking and the way they act. So the first thing they need to do is to create clarity. So everyone needs to understand the same picture in the management team, in the organization. So there is a line of sight from the vision, the true north, all the way to the actions. So that clarity needs to be created and focused on, and thinking, how do we do that? The second one is the courage. So we need to have the courage to make priorities so we don't fill up the system. We need to have the courage to break the status quo, and we need to have the courage to create real urgency. And this takes a lot from leaders to do that, because it's quite easy to just push ourselves a little. So we need to have that courage on the management team level and all the way into the organization. And then we need to have commitment. So we need to live the values, we need to keep the promises, we need to make sure that whatever we have prioritized, we can resource that. So we don't fall flat after we have done the planning. So there is a commitment needed, and we also need a commitment from every part of the organization to contribute. And then finally, we need to have that consensus, and this is very much what the catchball will help us to do. So we need to have a genuine and real agreement on these are the priorities, and we agree on that, and we will follow through on that. And sometimes it means that my idea didn't win. So this is how we can engage all levels. And then how do we drive execution? Because that's probably the most important thing, because planning is where many leaders are familiar to do. I mean, I have not yet met an organization that didn't do some kind of planning. So with Hoshin, we want to have perhaps a more problem-solving approach to planning compared to traditional, but driving execution is the most important part, I would say, and perhaps the biggest challenge sometimes. So that's kind of how do we execute on the problem-solving strategies and make sure we are making the right progress. And here I would like to say we want to go from activity focus to flow orientation, and this is based on the experience. I see that most organizations are very focused on making sure we do the activities and high level of activities, because like I said in the beginning, it creates a sense of we are busy and making progress. So we need to go from, are we following the plan in our monthly review meetings or steering group meetings, to will we meet our year-end target? Because that's the only thing that will matter at the end, not the plan. So we'll always need to make sure, will we still meet our year-end target? And that slowly will help us to go from activity-driven to flow-oriented, because the plan is only the hypothesis. So we think that the plan will help us, but we will learn during execution through the do phase, was that plan good enough to reach the target? And if it was not good enough, change the plan. And this is where we use many times what I like to use the bowler chart. Sometimes the X matrix could be another thing, but bowler chart was what we used at Toyota. So this is actually the template we had at Toyota in Excel. Nothing fancy, but highly effective used in the correct way. So the need, like I said in the first layer and the second layer, is something we put here. So the reason why this is important, we need to have a faster customer response. The idea, the countermeasure is that we need to have an AI-supported workflow. The KPI then would be the average response time. We aim for 90 minutes, which is a reduction of 50%, and we work throughout the year with Sarah as responsible. So this is just a made-up example how kind of that the first two layers can look like, the need and what to achieve. And then based on that, we set the plan. And the plan could be that we will go from 180 minutes and slowly, month by month, reducing that, and at the end of the year ending up on the 90. And then we look what was the actual outcome. And we might see that in January it was 178, 181, etc., etc. And then we start to evaluate with the traffic light system. And for me, here is also one of the big changes in the mindset, that when we put green, and at some point we might indicate that we are yellow, it's not about the plan for that particular month in February or March, if we are green or yellow. It's in relation to the annual target. So we always keep that in mind. So in this case, we see that even though in March we were 15 minutes above the plan, we say still it was green, because then we believed we will still meet the year-end target. But here in May, something happened that made us see now there is a risk that at the end of the year it will not be 90 minutes. So now we need to act. Once again, eyes on the prize, year-end target. And it could also be a plan that is, we need a go-no decision. We will develop an MVP. We will launch an MVP, and then we see what was the actual. It was approval. We developed the MVP. Everything seems to be green. We have a delayed MVP in May, and then it's yellow, not only because it's delayed, but because we see a risk at the end of the year we will not reach the 90 minutes. So these are just two illustrative examples to show you the thinking and how the bowler chart will help us, used correctly, to keep the eyes on the prize. And that's the conversation we need to have when we do our monthly review meetings. And when we get those deviations, how do we get back to track? Then, okay, we have a delayed MVP. We need to free up hours from project Z, and it needs to be done by June 10 to make sure we get back on track. So the deviations is about getting back on track to reach the year-end target. And for that, we have kind of the Kanri process or those monthly review meetings that sometimes happen, sometimes doesn't happen. And that's a frequent, structured, and focused on deviation. So that's a status meeting where we will look at progress, deviations, and learning. It's not a problem-solving meeting. Each owner presents current condition, perhaps using the bowler chart, what are the deviations and what are the next steps. The focus should be the deviations from the year-end target. So we need quick response, reprioritization when needed. It's always about year-end target. And who? The leadership team on different levels with the Hoshin owner presenting. And I would recommend this at least monthly. Sometimes it need to be more often, but not less than a monthly review meeting. And the tone in the meeting should be that clarity, courage, commitment, consensus. So we keep that thinking all the time. Do we have clarity enough? Do we have the courage? Are we committed? Do we agree? So when you think about setting up those review meetings, I think this could be kind of a good guidance on how to develop that in a good way. Because remember, the plan is just an hypothesis. That's what we think in the planning phase, what will help us or what will take us to the goal. But as soon as we start to move, we will most learn that we didn't think about everything or something unexpected happened. So that means that we need to check regularly and adjust whenever we need to. And that's kind of that PDCA cycle that we talk about, and that never stops. So to summarize, 3 things that you can take back to your team. Think about the direction. Do you understand your true north? What would be the, let's say, 2 to 4 real breakthroughs objectives? And like I said, if there is something you already know how to do, think about what should be then a real breakthrough. Prioritization. So don't do everything. Have the courage to actually decide what should be our annual targets for this year. What do we must accomplish? And then use the catchball to engage every level. And then, of course, follow through. Run these meetings with the right intention, looking at will we meet year-end target? And make sure you act on deviations. These are both big and small things you can do, but start to think in that way. I'm sure you will notice that things will shift in the mindset and hopefully also in your progress. That was it. It was a few minutes over time. Sorry for that. I'll leave it to Bill and Susan if there are any questions before we close everything.
Thank you, Frederick. I want to encourage everyone, if you have a question, please submit that through the Q&A button, if you would, please. And while we wait for folks to submit their questions, Bill, I'm going to turn it back over to you for some closing comments.
Yeah. Please get those questions in. I trust that you found Frederick's sharing both informative and enlightening. And if anybody has any interest in any follow-up, we are planning a more in-depth workshop that if that intrigues you or interests, I'll have some contact info that can be done with either a natural leadership team or it could be something like this where people from different businesses come together and kind of walk through that. And or you just want to talk about this stuff, connect with others We can try to create an informal network of people who just want to bounce thoughts or ideas. So I'll put my contact info as a start, and Susan's going to include it in the documentation that goes out afterwards, the follow up. So